2025 has been a year of sharp contrasts for the global food system. We've had breakthroughs on one hand, stress tests on the other, all reshaping how we grow, cook and eat in 2026. We're emerging from stubbornly high food inflation, and for millions the biggest issue remains simply, can they afford a healthy diet? And at the same time, climate shocks have become routine. So heat waves, droughts, floods, events once considered rare now arrive back to back, it seems. And in response, resilience has become the defining theme of 2025. So innovation is accelerating and regenerative agriculture has shifted from buzzword to battleground. And we all agree on the goals: healthier soils, more biodiversity, more resilient farms. But scaling these approaches still hinges on clear metrics, proper financing and consistent incentives, to name just but a few. And so as the year closes, our food system is more advanced, yet more fragile than ever. We've got better tools, greater collaboration and more momentum, but we're operating in a world of rising volatility, widening inequality and intensifying climate pressure. And that's where 2026 begins, right in the tension between innovation and inclusion, resilience and risk. And with this backdrop, today we're unpacking the trends that will define the next year in food. Welcome to the Food Fight podcast from EIT Food, a show exploring the biggest challenges in the food system and the innovators dedicated to solving them. I'm your host, Matt Eastland, and joining me to look ahead to 2026 are Sofia Khun, Director of Public Insights and Engagement at EIT Food, and Sara Roversi, activist, author, and founder of the Future Food Institute. Both welcome to the show.
Thank you, Matt.
Welcome. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much for being here. It's going to be great. So this one is going to be very wide-ranging. So let's just kind of roll straight into it, folks. So let's talk, before we get into 2026, let's talk just very briefly 2025. So I'd like to hear from both of you, what were your standout moments or key takeaways from 2025 from your perspectives? Sofia, maybe we can start with you.
I think for me, or sort of maybe not from a food systems perspective, but so maybe I can just give a little bit of background. But I head up a program called the Consumer Observatory, and what we do there is that we look at consumer behavior, barriers to food systems transformation, but really trying to do something that isn't really there at the moment. Of course, there's plenty of market research agencies, university studies, that kind of thing. But we wanted to really bring together a network of people that have the expertise in a way that we can respond to food systems challenges from a consumer perspective, quite agile, in a quite agile way. And what we've started looking at this year is really the role of policy. You know, what kind of policy changes do we need to make to arrive at a better food system, and seeing how consumers think about that. And there's a new policy coming up that is being discussed on biotech. And I think one of the highlights for me this year has been finding ways to better understand what kind of policies would land with consumers. And one of the things that have come out there very much, and I think it's not really surprising, but it's really fairness. And I think that is also something that we will see a lot more going forward in the food system. Fairness is something that will become very important in terms of the feeling. Consumers need to feel that things are fair. And that is perhaps something that we can forget, looking very much at the more techie side of food systems transformation. So really this trust and fairness side is something that we've seen time and time again. It's not something new, but it's something that I think will continue in 2026 as well. And this, for me, has been very strong 2025.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? You know, we've been talking about trust and fairness year after year after year, and yet, you know, your research and insights are still finding this is a challenge that we still need to address. So that in itself is interesting. And Sara, what about yourself? Standout moments.
So let's say we have been working a lot with communities in our living labs, trying to advance, together involving, of course, stakeholders from any different sectors, level, and integration, public, private, old and young, and so on. And this year, I think that finally this kind of approach, not only the approach, but also this kind of approach, not just in a one spot, but in a bioregional vision, has been, let's say, shared and scaled up.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of awareness, broader awareness, and say commitment from many different stakeholders. We've been always working with this kind of perspective, the bioregional perspective. Finally, I think that this year we're getting lots of inputs, and we are identifying weak signals that are finally pointing this change of kind of mindset in approaching and targeting issues. And I see that from many different levels, because of course, as you know, we are working both in European projects, research and innovation, but also in R&D or within the startup movement. And to say this is pretty helpful, because finally we see that we are not considering working just for a specific target. For example, innovation for citizens living in smart cities or big cities, or innovation targeting rural areas. But finally, we're starting thinking that we cannot live just by ourselves, but we need to create kind of a coalition of territories where big centers need to start to deal with this kind of new vision together with the rural areas. And this, of course, changes completely the perspective, because also at the policy level, we have been always seeing policies done for marginal areas, rural areas, coastal communities, or cities, never say thought at a systemic level. So this is, I think, one of the most interesting things that now is a little bit shaping also our approach to all the different projects.
Amazing. And I think that's just credit to you as well, that, you know, the fact that this is starting to shift now has obviously been because of the fact that you've had to work incredibly hard to make that happen. So well done on that. In terms of looking then into 2026, so one of the biggest shifts that we've seen shaping the food system right now, and I think one which will continue to define 2026, is this rapid move towards like what's being termed regulation-driven traceability. It doesn't sound very exciting, I will admit, but I guess what's happening, we're seeing, is what used to be a very niche sustainability commitment is becoming pretty much a basic ticket to trade for anyone selling into European markets. So if you take the example of the EU's deforestation regulation, that's completely raising the bar. It's requiring full geolocation of farms, satellite verified supply chains, and really hard proof that key commodities aren't being linked to this recent deforestation. So I guess I'm just interested to hear from both of you on both your perspectives. How significant is this shift in traceability, which is now being driven by regulation? What does that mean for the global food system? And again, Sofia, as someone who's like deeply engaged in that consumer insight side, I'd be interested to kick it off with just, do consumers even really understand what fully traceable means? Is that important to them in terms of supply chains? Do they care?
That's a very good question.
That's why I asked.
Yes. I think what we see in the studies that we've conducted and in the results and in the focus groups and things like that we've seen is traceability in terms of, well, let's say traceability and transparency. Transparency comes back time and time again. People really want to understand how businesses operate. And this is a trend we see coming more and more as well, especially with digitalization. We have a lot more access to a lot more information. The younger generations are looking very much at reviews. This is something that guides people in their choices. So I think that there is definitely something in there in terms of traceability is interesting to a lot of people. On the other side, on the flip side, there is also a feeling that there's just too much information
I was
out
going to say,
there.
there's got to be information overload out there, right?
Yes. And people want to be able to find the information, but it's sometimes very difficult to understand what it all means. So there's been quite a sort of a drive in recent time, for example, to add QR codes to everything. And we found in a recent study that is actually not what people want. It's too much. When you're out there in the supermarket, you're stressed, you're just coming back from work, you need to get home, cook a meal, and scanning a QR code on a product and reading all sorts of things is not what you're going to do. You just don't have the time for that. So information is wanted and needed, but not necessarily to that kind of extent. I guess what we're seeing as well is that people would like to be able to have access to more information if they have the time and inclination to read it. But I'm not sure that the level, going to the level of being able to trace everything is not what the average consumer would be sort of looking to do. However, consumers are changing and demanding better behavior, let's say, more sustainable behaviors. They want to know that the brands they trust and buy from are treating their workers well, for example. So there is probably some sort of want and need to go down that route.
Okay, but probably less is more in this example. And then Sarah, on the kind of the other side of the system, so you work directly with farmers, innovators, cities and communities around the world. So how are producers, in particular like smallholders, experiencing the push towards that EU level traceability piece? And do they see it as a burden? Or is this actually something that they kind of welcome as an opportunity, that they have to be more transparent, they have to have traceability elements in what they do?
So from what is my experience, the topic of traceability is also related to the topic of communication and giving value to their work. And so, of course, the farmers working in the multiple projects we are doing are basically in this field, not only to trace what they're doing on a daily basis, but because they know that this can be for them an entry point to get access to most valuable markets. And that basically gives visibility to the work that they're doing. Overall, the small farmers, let's say the ones that are working, investing on regen and so on, they need also to have the support of the storytelling part. They need to have more data and technology that can make their products understood by the customer, but also, let's say, trustful. So, of course, they are much more welcome to this kind of things, at least the ones that are working with us, because they see that as a need, a must to have to play in the big system.
Okay. Because I was just wondering whether or not they saw it just as one other layer of things that they just have to do now, or actually, from your perspective, they are embracing it. They see it as a good thing.
The one that are now investing, of course, they want to be mentioned. They want that their product is going to be trusted, because if not, they don't have the opportunity to express the value. And their product on the shelves, let's say, is equal to the one that maybe comes from the other side of the world with not so clear labels and so on. So, of course, for them is an added value.
Good. That's good to hear. Okay.
What is stressing out the farmers are the tons of paperwork and certification and all of those things.
Yes.
Those things are the one that stress them out.
Okay.
But when you are there to certify the good part of their work, for them, of course, is something good and positive.
I love that. Okay, so we haven't just added one other layer of bureaucracy to poor farmers. We've actually helped them out. That's a good thing. So let's go from kind of traceability to another persistent theme and trend around protein diversification, or as it's often known, alternative proteins. So we're seeing this kind of shift from this plant-based versus meat debate that has been, was waged a few years ago, to the narrative right now, which is hearing more about building balanced, resilient, like protein portfolios almost across regions and farming systems. And there is this also trend of what's becoming like quiet hybrids. So where products that blend smaller amounts of, for example, high welfare animal protein with plant fermentation-based or microprotein ingredients. So you still, for a consumer perspective, it's hitting the sweet spot of taste, cost, nutrition, and carbon impact. So it's a kind of a win-win all round. So looking at what this next phase of protein diversification looks like and what it means, Sofia, you've argued that consumers should shape innovation, and I guess this is partly what the Consumer Observatory is doing. What does involving people, like when the story is no longer ditch meat, but rethink your protein mix? What does that actually look like? So, are people accepting to that? Is there a trend towards consumers being completely fine with this sort of hybrid approach to protein diversification?
Well, the interesting thing is that there's sort of conflicting or slightly conflicting information. On the one hand, a lot of people, of course, I mean, you kind of imagine the same. People are interested in being sustainable and knowing that reducing meat is something that can help to be more sustainable. So there's a trend towards that. On the other hand, most people are not actually willing to give up meat entirely. So I think that this hybrid approach is probably what's more acceptable to most people, because it's not an extreme. And the way that we think about meat is sort of changing. And you see across Europe, so we carried out a study quite recently, which is really on the sort of the social aspect and the social meaning of meat. And what we see there, for example, is that we used to, in Europe, think very much about meat as a commodity. There's something that you would eat a lot of. It was cheap. It was something that you should have. Having lots of protein was something good, which is also something I think we've heard in marketing messaging for quite a while, that protein is important. We need lots and lots of protein. And people tend to, first of all, underestimate in general how much of something that they eat. But people still think that they need to eat more protein. It's something we find in our studies, that it's something that's very important. We need to eat more protein. But also the shift, the way that people think about meat is changing more towards this more traditional. Meat is something that is important in our culture, but we should produce it in a way that is more ethical. So grass-fed, resilient agriculture, that kind of thing. And then once we have that, then it's okay to still eat a little bit of meat. So the willingness to completely reduce meat consumption is not quite there because of this association with that we have to have lots of protein. And now this realignment of the value of meat in our culture, that this is something that meat is a valuable thing. It's something that we've done for generations and generations. We've eaten meat. It's something that is associated with heritage, with festivities, with special occasions. So yeah, this is kind of I guess not quite an answer to your question.
No, it absolutely is, and I guess your point about culture is also really interesting, and maybe Sara, you can comment here. So because you often talk about food as culture, and I'm just wondering do you see there's a space for like hybrid products, or sort of hybrid proteins fitting into like local identities? Does that enrich that culture, or does it actually challenge that culture because it's by its very nature it's doing something quite different?
Yeah, I love with this question actually. Also because I think that the meat and proteins issue is the real paradox of our era. And culture and the cultural pillar. Thank you, Sofia, for raising it up, because I think it's the starting point, needs to be the starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been always, say, very curious on one hand, but also very critical on another hand. I'm saying in one of the things I'm doing, I'm coordinating the Secretariat of Intangible Heritage of Mediterranean Diet, for example. Where, of course, in Mediterranean diet, I'm not talking just about the double pyramid. I'm talking about the cultural framework of Mediterranean diet, where basically meat consumption is linked again to traditions, festivity, and the adoption and the use and the consumption of meat was not high at all, but was something precious once a week or for the big celebration. So there was kind of a balance of adoption of ingredients, whether the consumption of legumes, pulse, and any other kind of vegetable elements, protein-based, was more present. Here, of course, we have the big ideological battle, because we saw in the last years, at least if I'm thinking to what I've been hearing and reading in the titles of the newspaper in my country, this was basically taken as an ideological battle. Answering to your question, if I see an hybridization or a cross-pollination within traditions and so on, I think that yet we haven't explored enough what nature can offer us. Because if you see our diets in big cities overall are very standardized. And also agriculture has not been supported enough to unleash the power of biodiversity, because of course the industry was maximizing the production of the most productive crops. Yeah. So we've been tackling the issue, finding solutions at the bottom of the chain, instead of approaching the issue at the beginning of the chain. Because then we're complaining because we're losing biodiversity. And then we're complaining because our diet is not diverse enough. So we started thinking to create new foods from scratch, whether we're not basically valorizing what was already there.
That's interesting.
And so I think that, yes, the hybridization can happen. But before thinking about the hybridization coming from new foods entering in the traditions, I would say, let's really see what was the tradition, and let's try to support and unleash basically what agriculture can offer, supporting the approach of this issue, doing some step back. On top of that, when we're talking about cultural heritage, intangible heritage, living heritages, where basically there are many of them that belongs to the gastronomic heritage of the different countries. Of course, this could be an hybridization, also because living heritage in every safeguarding plan is saying that you need to transfer the heritage to the future. So, of course, this needs to be adapted with what the world is facing. And, of course, we are not saying that you need to eat the specific kind of tomato, because those heritages are not stuck into the recipe, but in the principles, in the values and the principles that are the starting point, basically, when you have to identify what is the living heritage.
It's fascinating, actually. I think there's probably a whole another podcast in here just thinking about it around, because we're sort of saying to consumers, these are the products that you want, and by the way, because we're making them more hybrid, that's going to be better for you, better for the planet. But actually, based on kind of a bit of like you're both agreeing with each other, it's almost like if you started from a cultural perspective first, then you really need to understand the culture that sits behind or underneath consumers before you actually are able to deliver these products to them. So that's that. Okay, folks, there's another show in here for the next season, but that's very interesting.
But there is, Matt. There's also, there's a lot of research that shows that when it comes to food innovation and food technology, consumers are not keen on that affecting the foods itself. It's the production of the food, the processes. If the processes are more environmentally friendly or better for the health profile of the product, great. But this sort of mashing up and creating new types of food, it's not something that the consumers are particularly, or people in general, are particularly open to. So from that perspective, I would say that it's maybe not such a welcome addition to our food shopping. And just this is an example which has got nothing to do with meat, but we've just done a study on indulgence in general, but more towards sort of the sweet sector, and that was sort of what we found out, which I think is very interesting, and I think some of these results can be applied to other areas as well. Because when you look at indulgence products such as cakes and things like that, if you look at healthy indulgence, what people would like to have from a health perspective, people want something that is healthier on an everyday basis. Like if I want to eat, I don't know, a muffin every day, I would prefer my muffin to be healthier on a day-to-day basis. But if I'm going to get together with my friends and celebrate something, I want to have the full fat, full sugar, full indulgence version.
Okay.
Because then it's not about being healthy or thinking about that. It's about enjoyment and the social aspect of getting together with friends and celebrating something. And then you want the maximum experience, basically.
That's fascinating. I've not heard this phrase "healthy indulgence" before, so that might be a thing as a trend. So liking that. Can we jump from healthy indulgence to sort of regenerative? I mean, again, a topic we talk about a lot on the show. So what, like I was saying at the top of the show, so what was once largely experimental, so, regenerative, we had pilot projects, research trials, small-scale initiatives. That's now starting to move to something which is, I guess, is a lot more common, a lot more supported, a lot more integrated into the system. And also they're kind of being framed almost like essential tools to meet, EU Green Deal, farm to fork goals. So including big reductions in pesticide, fertilizer use, soil health, increased organic production. So that's all been kind of baked into the system. And I wanted to ask each of you on that point, how far along do you think Europe is in making regen the standard, not the exception? Do you think we can ever get to that place, or is that, again, is that the wrong question to be asking? Sara, with your background, maybe you can kick us off.
I'm warming up for the answer because
I can see it. I can see you moving.
I'm going to answer with another question.
Okay.
How authentic we're going to be in tackling regeneration and regenerative farming? Because this is going to be the big question. What we consider regenerative. Are we letting all the big chemical companies getting in, targeting regenerative, just tackling one of the aspects of the regenerative process, the regenerative mindset, the regenerative system? Or we are tackling regenerative farming as the organic regen farmers are tackling regenerative farming? Because the fact that there's no certification, and the real regen farmers says we don't want that certification because the certification is going just to be designed to allow other people, the big ones that are doing or claiming for regen that is not regen, what it is. And so they're going to completely abandon the name regenerative, and they're going to find another thing, because the farmers that are doing the real regen farming, starting from the manifesto of the climate farmers, or the one that we're starting with the process, you see that clearly you need to change your approach to life. And you need to put in place a system, that you need to cooperate and collaborate with a system around you. That probably also the product development related to the product coming from those farms is going to be designed in a different way. As you know, we have the big regeneration initiatives with the Faro and Lighthouse, with regen farming. We are training regen farmers. We are very much into the system. we see that this is going to be a system that, if we want to tackle it in a very in a proper way, from my perspective, we need to act on many multiple dimensions, not only thinking about agriculture, because what needs to be set it up is a brand new system on how to manage the entire food chain, from the product design up to the shelves, from the product design up to the school meal plans, up to the markets, to the distribution, energy, health system. So from my perspective, I see Europe, say, in a good shape, because if I see in the last 6 years, since when we started really targeting with regeneration and all about the other initiatives, this topic, I saw how much we have been evolving. I see there's still lots that needs to be done, but I started seeing lots of companies that started making the transition without even being stressed about the certification or other things, but because they decided to change their approach to life and, of course, production.
So based on all of that, Sara, do you think that regenerative agriculture is, at least in the naming of it, is coming to a crunch time where the ethos is going to divide from like big business moving into regen ag and saying we're now doing regen ag, whereas in actual fact what you're talking about is like ground level systemic change? Do you see actually regen ag might kind of part ways and become something completely different so that people can keep it away from like the big players?
This is the big risk. This is the big thing, the big topics we are debating with all the regen farmers, all the ones that are doing all the training programs for EAT food and all of the network of the real regen farmers. Of course, this is the big risk. Is like the wave of greenwashing that we have seen in the last, let's say, 2 decades around sustainability, and then resilience, big buzzwords that then are going to be, say, titles for brands, but are not actually substantially changing the system. I see that within the regen movement, there are other people that really can be able to regenerate and restart and redesign the system. But we need also the big industries to be brave enough to tackle the system, because it's not going to be easy. This is, of course, for big industries. And we have been, say, designing pilots for the larger player, thinking about how much, if we want to really to be coherent and stuck with the real regen process, we need to change not only in food, not only in production, not only in farming. So because needs to change the entire system around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just picking up on the classic greenwashing aspect of this, like you mentioned, Sara. I mean, Sofia, I wonder if you could comment on that from a consumer perspective. Are consumers, how aware are they of like regen ag, climate resilient practices, and are they accepting them? And also, to what Sara was just saying, is there a worry that they kind of are accepting almost the wrong thing because it's coming from big business?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's kind of the case. I mean, to start with, farmers are extremely trusted. So European farmers are trusted by people, that they're doing a good job. And, it's this sort of idea that farmers do this because it's heritage. It's not a money-making business, and it's because they respect the earth, and they're sort of, it's a greater good kind of thing to be a farmer. There's, of course, some differences. People are aware that there are industrial farms versus small farms, and that there's a difference between these. But some of the terminology, like regenerative agriculture, it's not something that's very well known amongst general people. We did a recent study where we looked at this, and once explaining what it is, everyone obviously agrees that this sounds like it's better for our environment, for our planet, and for our health and everything. So it's something that people are, of course, open to, but most people don't see the need for it at the moment, or didn't see the need for it because they didn't actually know that there was a problem. So there's little awareness amongst the sort of the the general public that we haven't, that there is a problem with agriculture in Europe. And once we'd explained it to the focus groups that we were dealing with, they were worried, as you were just saying, that unless there is like some certification or some way of ensuring that what you're buying is indeed produced in a certain manner, that this is going to be used for greenwashing purposes.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because, it's almost like both sides of the system are potentially trying to do the same thing, but actually by the demand for certification and for clarity and transparency, that's actually potentially driving the wrong outcome, perhaps. It's a really interesting space, and I guess this is how things kind of evolve, and then the food system kind of takes over. And I'm very interested to see where this goes in 2026. Then, this is obviously something we've been championing at EIT Food for a very long time, and I'm just wondering whether or not we're going to start seeing like splinter movements. But interesting. Watch this space. Go on, Sara. I know you want to.
I think that this is going to be the real big topic. And if I see also in the major conferences last year in Davos, I was joining lots of conferences where there were the big, most powerful organizations, funding and funds and so on that are there to support the regen transitions. But let's really start to think about how we define the regen transition, because we're not just talking about a new trend, we're talking about billions invested in this regen transition. So we need to rethink in a regen way, finance, economy, everything. So it's not just a nice thing in farming. What I see and what we're doing, we're working on regenerative city planning. We're working on regeneration at multiple levels. It is not only circular economy. And we have seen how much circular economy has been driving lots of investment. This thing of regeneration, I think that needs to be addressed at a systemic level. If I'm thinking about Europe from the different DGs, because needs really and require a different kind of leadership, different kind of leadership of entrepreneurs that need to see cooperation as the starting point. So you were talking about building the trust. This is one of the pillars in this kind of principles. And I see that still it's a cultural shift that needs to happen on top of an industrial shift. Industrial shift comes after, but we need a big cultural and leadership shift.
Yeah. Okay. So regenerative transition, cultural shifts. Yeah, maybe this is something which is going to be like a big focus for 2026. So you heard it. You heard it here, folks. So like I said, bouncing around a little bit, but how could we have an episode on trends without talking about AI? Right? It's everywhere. I'm not going to avoid the elephant in the room. We have to, because it's important, and we're already seeing very strong signals that AI and robotics are top line agri-food tech trends. We've spoken about it before, but it's obviously accelerating. And it looks like 2026 could see us move from like the flashy prototypes to tools that are real, that average-sized farms, for example, can implement and actually use. For example, I've got something here that you've got decision support tools that plug into existing machinery, soil and weather data that can all help farmers make smarter fertilizer, spray, and irrigation choices. And then robotics and sensors may increasingly be shared via cooperatives or service providers, making advanced tech much more accessible and simpler, I guess, to smaller operations, which feels like a really good thing. But Sara, you work closely with farmers. How are small to average-sized farms reacting to AI, automation, and field intelligence tools? Are they eager adopters? Are they cautious? Are they curious? To all of this, and is it going to help them 2026 onwards?
It is going to help them. I've seen also from the different unions and farmers organizations tackling this topic, teaching them, training them. Super cool. what I see is that, again, I want to tackle back the cultural shift and what's going to be the impact in 10 years, what's going to be the impact in 5 years or 15 years. The impact on their brain, the impact on their way of working, the impact on their knowledge. Because I think that everyone is focused on the technology of AI. We're using it a lot. But what I find is that I need to be aware that I need to train myself even more to make sure that I'm using AI in the proper way. And so I'm focused on what we need to build around AI to make sure that we are really using the value of AI properly. Mm-hmm. Because I'm afraid that we are sometimes celebrating AI, whether we are just fostering a system that is creating massive echo chambers that are only creating, say, scalable failures, scalable mistakes.
Scalable failures.
So I'm very much focused on what's the input that we need to put in place to, say, train better humans, to train better humans so we can use any kind of solution in a better way. We cannot basically avoid the fact of learning, studying, train the farmers, bring science in the farm. We sometimes are selling the fact that you don't need to be acknowledged about something because it's going to be the machine that is going to tell you what to do. It's not so true. So I don't want that we're going to become lazier farmers, that we're going to become dumbest
the irony
farmers.
Being that AI makes humans less intelligent and therefore less connected.
And we already see the effect. There are already lots of papers published in the most advanced medical journals. So this is my frustration. And I love the fact that you tackled this topic because this is the big elephant in the room. And I invite everyone listening literally to really start to think about how we can support AI, how we can become better humans, to use better farmers, better food makers, better chefs, so we can use AI and really unleash the power of AI.
And do you see that from just use farmers as an example, from the farmers that you're working with, do you see that AI is making better human farmers or not?
It's not going to be AI to make better human farmers.
Okay.
The fact is that we need to consider AI as it is. It's a technology. Mm-hmm. Because if we are moving ethical decisions, critical thinking, and all of those things to the machine, we're making the big mistake. So we need to keep going very much, I think, being very much focused on humans, unleashing the power of humans and humanity to make sure that we can really use the technology in the proper way. Because if not, at some point, the technology is just going to be, say, there creating and expanding the unknown, ignorance, mistakes. It's I think our role to be aware of the fact that we have to tell to our students that they need to study even more, not to study less because now they have the AI. And this happens at every level.
Yeah. And just on the point around unleashing that power, I mean, Sofia, have you seen any, from the work that you're doing, do you see like consumers coming into this space? Where do they come into this space? You know, do you see like people outside the farming world engaging in this topic? You know, are people interested in it, or is it still too vague, too weird and wonderful for consumers really to get their heads around in the kind of the agri-food space, at least?
Yeah, I think as the different aspects, I think I mentioned it earlier that there's a general acceptance of technology when it comes to the way it's applied to the production of food. So if AI is applied in a way that, or robotics, whatever, in a way that enables our food to be produced in a more environmentally friendly way, or a way that makes it healthier for for the consumer, then that's generally quite accepted because it's not something that tampers with the food itself. So that's a general kind of feeling around new technologies in food production. I think AI specifically, and sort of the general sort of new tech comes with some opportunities and risks from a consumer perspective. I think from a consumer perspective, one of the issues is the amount of information. So misinformation is something that was an issue before AI came along. The fact that there's just so much information out there and consumers just don't know what to trust. But that's become even harder because you don't even know if it's a person that has written what you're reading or that has produced what you're reading. So on the one hand, it offers opportunities, but I think, or what we've seen at least, that this seems to have kind of created a bit more of a drive, or a step back, perhaps is the better definition of it, towards listening to experts, wanting advice from experts. And I think and I hope that this is going to continue, that actually people are going back to wanting advice from real people with qualifications, because it's just so difficult to know where to find that advice otherwise. I think there's a social potential risk, the fact that there are opportunities such as personalized nutrition and personalized advice that you can use AI for, which is a trend as well, that we want more, something that's personalized. Our society is more and more diverse. We've kind of moved away from this nucleus way of being, and there are so many people are identifying as so many different things. We have lots of different religions, cultures, all living in a melting pot, which has been enabled by all sorts of other technologies that have been developing in the previous couple of hundred years. But this is then, so these are opportunities then to sort of, you want something that is specific for you. Healthy aging is a trend that we see. So kind of trying to link it all together. But healthy aging, people are more aware that if you eat well, you might have a longer and healthier life, and not just a longer life, but a healthier life to stay healthy during those years, those hopefully longer years that you're living. And so people are more using it in more of a preventative way. And I think there are lots of opportunities here. But what it takes away from us is the social aspect, that all of a sudden you are not dealing with people anymore. You're always dealing with an app. You're always dealing with somebody or something, a technology that is telling you something, which is based on many more data points, obviously, than any person could actually access. But my worry is that this social isolation that will come with it is also something that is going to perhaps be an issue. And from a food systems perspective, food is social. Mm-hmm. It is something that eating is social. There's a very, very large part of eating that is linked to our social and cultural heritage. So kind of coming full circle to what we discussed at the beginning, we just cannot detach the food system. I very much echo what Sara is saying. It is all linked together. And we can't look at technology in isolation from all sorts of all the other things. We have to look at it all in a sort of holistic, cyclical way and how it fits together.
It sounds like, a fascinating point around, there is now with the rise of AI, there's a trend towards people wanting actual human experts. That in itself is fascinating, because the theory is that everyone now has at their fingertips access to all the information they could ever want or need. But of course, as you said, Sofia, you don't know if that information is true, if it's correct, if it's been hallucinated by an AI. And actually, they'd rather just listen to and talk to and engage with somebody who actually be able to stand there and say, look, I've done this. I've got all the qualifications. I've been doing in this for like 20, 30 years. That, I do have an opinion on this. Maybe you should listen to me. So I think that's interesting. And then once again, we seem to be coming to that point that there is a glue that binds all of this, which is culture. And it's, like you say, Sofia, it's so true when it comes to food. You just can't extract them out. Interesting. I wonder whether or not AI is going to try and resolve that, but who knows? We'll see. Sophia, you mentioned health, and again, we shouldn't and couldn't talk about trends without talking about health. And I wanted to talk about health with regards like food processing. We've touched on it a little bit in the rest of the show around like reformulations. So there are concerns around processed food, particularly ultra processed foods or UPFs. And what I've seen particularly this year is there are a lot of headlines about how bad this all is. And I think that's really positive, because I think people need to know that, because, we're starting to uncover all of the challenges around UPFs. But people still want convenience, right? So what we're starting to see is this shift towards reformulations across Europe. So simpler ingredients, the lists on the backs of packets, that's become a thing. Fewer additives, more fiber, more protein, that's become a thing. Functional foods targeting gut health, the microbiome, mental well-being, all of these are becoming things. But of course, there are loads of claims now which are coming under even greater scrutiny. So stronger evidence, clearer labeling. So I guess I'm interested, question to both of you, how do you see the food industry responding to this? The fact that we're kind of moving through this, everyone's understanding more about the processing side and consumers are demanding more of this. So what's going to be the food industry's response to that, do you think? Sofia, maybe you have a take, or maybe your take is, how are consumers responding to that? And maybe that will reflect how the industry is going to respond. I don't know.
I think so we've seen, I mean, it's anecdotal, but we worked with a few companies actually that has exactly that concern. Like, how can they respond to these concerns in a better way? And it's definitely something that consumers want, is something that something that is associated with more wholesome food, home cooking, ingredients that they recognize. On the other hand, I think there is still quite a bit of confusion. I think that we know a lot about ultra-processed food and processing, but I'm not 100% sure that this is so clear to the population at large. Even though there's a lot more awareness, because we've had, and this is coming back to what we were saying before about expert advice, a lot of that is actually because of experts that have spoken out and have come forth with science-backed information. So I think that's great. But people still associate ultra-processed very much with indulgence. It comes back to the indulgence. It's a treat. It's something. It's something that you have to treat yourself because you've done something good, or you're feeling down, or it's not your everyday diet. Self-reporting shows that when people say how much ultra-processed food they eat, they severely underestimate how much they actually eat. Things like flavored yogurt, bread, tomato sauces. People still don't see that as ultra processed. They see that as just processed. And there the difference is that convenience then wins over knowledge. I think these products are already established as something that you rely on in your everyday life. There's a difference when you have new products. So we talked about alternative proteins. So some of these alternative protein products that are available on the shelves, they're considered ultra-processed by people, and they are ultra-processed. And the fact that they're often healthier than the equivalent, the meat equivalent, if you have chicken nuggets or any sort of processed meat, that is generally less healthy than the alternative protein version of it. But the fact that it's a new product that most people, it's not an established product that a lot of people have on a regular basis in their diets. Therefore, the barrier to actually start eating them is higher because there's this association with ultra processed. Whereas with other products that we sort of we've incorporated very, very firmly into our everyday lives, the association is not quite there yet.
Okay.
So But I think it's something that the food industry will have to take into account going forward, because the scrutiny will rise. So people will know more and more, and they will ask for more and more. So it's kind of keeping ahead of the curve.
Okay.
If you want to keep ahead of the curve, you need to do something.
Yeah, indeed. And Sara, how does this jar with your, the importance of the Mediterranean diet and this framework that you're talking about? So processing, convenience, all of that, it feels like it stands in direct contrast to all of this. And, do you feel that it does? And, in terms of a trend, which way is this going then? Are we going to see a resurgence in people doubling down on Mediterranean diet, or are actually people going to be...
It's my dream.
It is your dream, I know.
My dream. My dream. But let's say this is my dream. On the other hand, I'm the same person who's, of course, saying that we cannot feed the 10 billion people only relying on Mediterranean diet. So I'm aware about that. I'm aware also about the fact that every place in the world has different needs, and every place in the world has different production capacities and so on. So I think it's interesting to tackle this issue back again, starting from the principles. And I also think that we need to help the entire food systems and the big food industries to make cleaner labels and to reduce additives and so on as much as we can, to process just what is needed and so on. On the other hand, food safety at large has seen lots of evolutions and lots of technologies within the last, let's say, 40 decades. And this made our products and also diseases related to that say more safe. So I see that we need also to tackle this topic, not being only focused on, of course, thinking about the beauty of and the luck of the people that can survive and feed themselves with local products, seasonal products, the farmers market, and so on. But we need also to think about solving food security at the global level. And in that, also to think not only about food security, but also to nutrition security. Because sometimes we have been tackling about feeding people, but not nourishing them in a healthy way. So again, I know that I'm making things more complex by raising these topics, but this is one of the angles that sometimes is underestimated. So of course, I'm doing my battles again, ultra processed food, because we don't need that. But I'm not saying that we can survive only through farmers market. We need to celebrate and give space to farmers as much as we can. We need also to think how might we feed the people that are on the other side of the world that doesn't have access to that and need, of course, this kind of foods.
You see, I don't think you're complicating things. I actually think my take from that is we should be celebrating, diets like the Mediterranean diet, which also therefore celebrate local foods, lots of vegetables, fish, etc. But to your point, you said only process what's necessary with everything else. And I think as a good step forward, that feels to me like a really good step forward. And I think we're starting to see those trends, like I'm saying, with few ingredients, etc. So again, maybe this is a trend which will accelerate in 2026. Both of you, we are. Sorry.
Just one last thing, and I think that creating space to consider food also from the cultural perspective. I think is one of the things that has been a little bit lacking in the last decades. But again, culture means also production, means tradition, means preservation, means local seeds and so on. So reconnecting to the transition, it's a cultural transition that then, of course, is going to tackle also this topic. And here, this week overall, we're celebrating Mediterranean diet because this year we're celebrating 15th anniversary, and we're working to create the World Day of Mediterranean diet. And here, it seems like a provocation. No one is saying that we need to eat the same ingredients, but are the principles behind Mediterranean diet that are universal principles, tackling health and sustainability, but where the principles are seasonality, local food, agricultural practices, sustainable fishery, time spent around the table because it impacts on health and so on. So those principles are universal principles, are not just belonging to the Mediterranean.
Indeed. And I am with you in celebrating that. And I really hope that the day of the Mediterranean diet comes around. So best of luck with that, Sara.
Thank you.
Both of you, we are now right at the end of the episode. But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear from both of you, just from your perspectives, what's on the horizon for you for 2026? And when I say that, I mean, what's exciting you in terms of what's happening in the food system right now that you'd like to leave our audiences with? Sara, maybe we can stay with you, and then Sofia, I'll come back to you.
What excites me, let's say the fact that finally we're shifting our mindset, and there are lots of bioregional initiatives, bioregional weaving labs. People are starting understanding that living labs and weaving labs are physical, real. We need to work more and more with the community. And we have lots of projects and initiatives across Europe, but also, let's say, over the borders of Europe. I think that this is the main thing. So starting really working together with this kind of bioregional vision.
Amazing. Thank you for that, Sara. And Sofia?
It feels like this cultural fairness side of the food system is actually finally becoming truly recognized. That this is something that needs to, we need to take into account. For example, I mean, the sort of the access to food environments, fair treatment. That was something that was highlighted in the Eat Lancet, the latest Eat Lancet, as one big pillar of what needs to happen to not exceed the planetary boundaries in terms of, from our food system perspective. And I don't know, I mean, I've been working on this for years and years and years now. And sort of the fact that it's now recognized that it's more than just technology. We need to understand the social aspect of food. We need to understand the environment around us and how this environment influences our choices. We need to treat people that work in the food system in a good way, and we need to take into account all of the different aspects of the food system in order to make a difference. And I think for me that is exciting, and I hope that this will continue in years to come and become stronger and stronger.
Amazing. So 2026 could be the year of food culture and fairness. So yeah, I look forward to seeing how that evolves. Before we wrap then, Sofia, let's stay with you. Where can people find out more about who you are and what you do?
So, well, I think the people can just check on AI. No, seriously. LinkedIn, of course. My name, Sofia Khun. And we also have, I think, on the website, the Consumer Observatory website, which is one of the websites of the EHF Food website, so you can find us there. And obviously I have an email address. I don't know what kind of detail you want.
Probably don't give that out just yet. But yeah, okay, I get it. Thank you very much, Sofia. And Sara, what about you? Where can people find out more about the work that you're doing?
So I'm the founder and president of the Future Food Institute. So of course, through our website, futurefoodinstitute.org, but also the paideacampus.org, that is our international campus, and then on Medium and all the different social media. Super glad also to answer to your question, or to connect if you want to spark new projects, research initiatives, or work on gastro diplomacy. Thank you, Sofia, for raising the topic. I think that really considering food as a tool to build new policy, the starting point to build new policies and a tool for diplomacy, it's the thing that we hold in our hands. So connect with us also to join our boot camps, both for climate shapers, gastro diplomacy, and all the different initiatives.
Amazing. Thank you, Sara. And there's an invite there to all of our listeners. Please do connect. Please do get involved. Sofia and Sara are here ready and waiting. Thank you both. That has been another amazing Trends episode. These are kind of like my highlights, literally the highlights of the year, but also one of my favorite episodes. So thank you very much for your time, for sharing those insights, and hopefully everyone has taken as much away from that as I have. And thank you to everyone for tuning in to this week's episode. This has been the Food Fight podcast. If you'd like to find out more, then check out the EIT Food website at www.eitfood.eu and join the conversation via the hashtag EITFoodFight on our LinkedIn channel at EITFood. And of course, if you haven't already, please hit the follow button so you never miss an episode. Thanks, everyone. Speak to you soon.